All right, can you all hear me? If people want to move up, this is a small and intimate gathering of friends, which is, I think it's right to think about it that way, because this is in some ways, I would say, an intimate book. So I think it's appropriate that we all sort of take our policy hats off. There's a policy element to this, but this is much more of a human discussion. So I'm really happy you're all here today. And my name is Laura Friedman. I'm the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. It is my pleasure to have you here today at the Middle East Institute, our partner organization on so many activities. And we have with us here today my friend Moriel, who I have known now for 10 years, at least 10 years. And I know Moriel from his work as an activist on the ground, and as a very courageous and vocal activist who has consistently reminded those of us who work on the policy issues to never, ever, ever stop thinking about the human side. And that's sometimes a challenge, it's something we need reminding of. A few months, when did this book come out, a year ago? In February of this year, Moriel published a book, which is available in the back, called Sadness is a White Bird, which is a fiction novel, work of fiction, that looks at the conflict through a very specific human lens. I recommend it highly. It is a beautiful book and a kick in the gut at the same time, which I think is sorely needed. So today, today Moriel is going to start out by reading a little bit, right? And then we're going to have a conversation about the book. Hello? We're going to have a quick conversation about the book, and we're very, very quickly going to open it up. There's a small enough group here that I really think we can have a conversation with everybody. So, Moriel, I'm going to hand it off to you. Begin.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? So it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm very grateful to Lara and to Kristen and to all the folks from the Foundation for Middle East Peace for inviting me here. And it's nice to be here in my novelist's hat, rather than only my activist's hat, although I'm happy to talk about the activism side of myself and my work as well, if that's of interest to folks. I think I'll just read a few quick sections from this book to give a sense of the language, of the themes, of the characters, and then Laura and I will talk and we'll open it up. So the first page, the opening page of the book, this gives, I think, a little taste in some of the less linear and more lyrical elements of the book. And so here the narrator, Jonathan, is addressing his friend Laith. Oh, Laith, I don't know shit about flowers. I was a soldier who dreamed of her breasts in evening blossom, though. We left our pants on, and for hours our torsos touched like two gene-handled torches. The truth, Laith, the truth is that Nimreen and I could have named our kids Amir and Sarah. You could have taught them names for raisin stars, but when I last saw Nimreen, my hair was cut, and when I last saw you, your wink was blotted out, and I could only hallucinate white lilies and the smoke of your breath on my eyelids, the stroke of her tongue in my ear. The truth is that I chose to forget Nimreen's eyes, which were exactly the same sidewalk color as yours. I miss your eyes so much I can't breathe right, Habibi. Can I still call you that? Habibi, my darling. Laith. Maybe we'll meet again like Yossi and Mahmoud in a city far away from here. And so this next section is a little bit later in the book, earlier in the narrative. Here, Jonathan, Laith, and Nimreen. Laith and Nimreen are twins, Palestinian citizens of Israel. Jonathan is an American Israeli, 17 years old, has recently moved back to a northern Israeli town with his family, and is preparing, as Jewish Israeli 17-year-olds too, is preparing to enlist in the military. And in the midst of his preparation, he meets and falls into sort of a complicated love and friendship with these two Palestinian twins, both of them 18 students at the University of Haifa. In this chapter, Laith, Nimreen, and Jonathan have taken a bus down to a southern Israeli town called Ainsby in this book. And Jonathan has just remembered that the buses stopped running because of Shabbat. He swam over to the lifeguard and found out they missed the last bus, and the lifeguard responds to him. "It's all right," he said. "You should just hitchhike. It's cool. Everyone does. There aren't really any Arabs down here. Nothing to worry about, bro." I was glad that you and Nimreen were out of earshot, didn't hear my silence, my obsequious thank you, bro, the splash of shame as I dunked underwater and swam back to me. "What was that about?" Nimreen said. "Were you reporting to Arabs spotted lurking in the shallow end?" "It's true we don't swim so well," you said. "No reports," I said, pushing my hair off my forehead into the side, an emotion I picked up from you over the past few months. "We just missed the last bus because of Shabbat." "Fuck," Nimreen said. "Oh, God of Moses and Ben Gurion," you said, raising your hands above your head and looking skyward. "We are but two lowly Gentiles who know nothing of your ways. Spare us, give us a bus home, and we'll sacrifice this one out of gratitude." "The lifeguard said we should hitchhike," I said. "Hitchhike?" Nimreen said, furrowing her eyebrows, the piercing catching a glint of sun refracted off the blue chlorine clearness of the water. "Are you all right, Jonathan? Sunstroke, maybe?" She placed her hands on either side of my face and peered exaggeratedly into my eyes, and I wanted her hands never to leave, wanted her lips to move just a few centimeters forward. Instead, I laughed and squiggled out of her grip. "What?" I said. "It'll be fine. It'll be an adventure." You shook your head. "If we get chopped up into little pieces, then I'll make sure to collect all of them and put them back together. Come on. Guys, what are you so worried about? Relax." You and Nimreen exchanged a look, one of those looks, one of your looks. "It doesn't work like that, Jonathan. We don't hitchhike," Nimreen said. "This is not a safe country for us like it is for you." "What?" I said. "Come on. That's what everyone says to Jews too, like, don't hitchhike because you might get picked up and murdered by an Arab. Anyway, I'm with you, I'll protect you." I flexed my biceps and made a scowling face and then leapt into your arms late, and you almost didn't catch me, but then you did, and held me like a baby, supported by the buoyancy of the water, and I felt the heat of your chest rising and falling with laughter, and Nimreen laughed too, and it was agreed that we tried because fuck it, so we put our clothes on and trudged down the hill toward the crystal shimmering blue of the Dead Sea, and the bus stop across the street from where we'd been dropped off, and within 30 seconds, a black Jeep appeared down the road, and I stuck out my thumb and ignored your eyes, and the car slowed and then stopped. I ran forward. The passenger window rolled down, and I saw a very pretty woman smiling at me from the shotgun seat. She had dark eyes and heavy eyelashes and looked to be in her early 20s. "Where to?" "Well," I said, "around Haifa, but even..." "You're in luck," she said. "We're heading to Akko. Hop in." Past her, holding the wheel, was a dark-skinned guy. I glanced at him and noticed that he had a small kippah on his head. "Will you make it before Shabbat?" I asked. "That's the plan," the guy said, smiling with all his teeth. He must have been about my age, maybe a year older. He was wearing a sleeveless shirt, and his arms were thin and covered with dark helices of hair. "Hop in." "You have room for 3, I said. "Of course," the woman said. "Come on," I said in English to you and Nimreen. I noticed now that both your faces looked strained, but there was nothing to be done at this point, right? We needed to get home, and these two were clearly not the type to chop us up into pieces. Nimreen walked slowly around to the other side of the car and got in behind the driver. I slid into the middle, and you got in on my right. I liked feeling each of your thighs pressed against mine, but I could also sense the subterranean discomfort radiating from your bodies. We started moving, and the woman introduced herself, in Hebrew, as Yael. "And this is my brother Shimon." "Nice to meet you," I said quickly, skipping past the stage where we might say our names, eyeing Shimon's kippah a little warily as if it was a creature that might lunge at us. I knew that wasn't fair. My own father wore a kippah sometimes, and he was nothing but gentle. But still, you and Nimreen didn't say anything. "What were you doing out here?" I asked. "Hang gliding," Shimon said. "Wow," I said. "First time?" "Yep." "First time," Shimon said. "Oh, fantastic," I said, not looking to my left or to my right. "And how was it?" "Amazing," Yael said. "It was like being connected to 2 giant birds. That sounds awesome. What are your..." Yael started. "Do you live in Akko?" I cut her off. "Shimon just moved there," Yael said. "I'm spending Shabbat with him. We're actually from Givat Avinu." I swallowed. Givat Avinu, as in the Israeli settlement of Givat Avinu in the West Bank. Speaking of which, I realized that as Yael had said that, we had just crossed over the checkpoint into the West Bank from the south. On the way to Ein Tzvi, which is on the Israeli side of the border, the bus from Jerusalem had glided through the West Bank, as was its route. But none of us mentioned it. Somehow, being on a bus made us feel removed from the world around us. It had its path, and we could either join or not. Now, though, the crossing felt different. Oh, what were you doing in Akko, Shimon? I said, changing the subject again. I'm studying at the Yeshivat Hesder, Shimon said. What's that? I asked. It's the Jewish military yeshiva in the middle of an Arab neighborhood that is trying to turn Akka into a place for Jews only. A fourth voice joined in Hebrew, low and familiar, Nimreen. The air in the car froze like dry ice, fragile and chemically strange. Yael twisted around in her seat and words began to pour out of her mouth. Oh wow, you speak Hebrew? I thought you were tourist. I heard, weren't you speaking English earlier? I'm originally from the US, I said, quickly glancing over to Nimreen, trying to speak to her with my eyes, without words, the way the two of you always did, but she wouldn't return my gaze. I looked over to you to ask for help, but your eyes were focused on something else also. Your eyes were exactly your sister's eyes in that moment. We speak Hebrew, you said, your voice soft, your R's rolling like the hills on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea, Medabrim Yuvrit. Where are you from? Shimon asked. I peered over his shoulder at the speedometer. We hit 140 kilometers per hour. I didn't know what that was in miles per hour exactly, but it felt a little fast. Us, Nimreen said, her voice too calm, which I recognized by this point as a sign that she was angry. Akka was to Akko, as El Birwa was to Achihud, except that Arabs still lived in Akko, Akka, and this Yeshivat Hesder was implanted there, according to Nimreen, to make that not the case. Shimon Yael didn't contradict her. I couldn't blame her for what she said next, but still I cringed, thinking, Nimreen, there's so much left for us to live for. Thinking, Nimreen, I adore you. Thinking, Nimreen, let's move to Akka, teach our babies Arabic and Hebrew and English and Espanol for good measure. Thinking, Nimreen, we're doomed. We're from Palestine, Nimreen said. Yael laughed. Maybe she thought Nimreen was kidding. Shimon didn't laugh. 150 kilometers per hour. Are you I looked at his eyes in the mirror, big and brown and shiny. He looked afraid. Are you Arabs? I'm Jewish, I said, making my voice as gentle as I could. I wish I'd had a bar mitzvah, you said, chuckling as if nothing were amiss. We were now going 160 kilometers per hour down this thin ribbon of road. We are definitely Arabs, Nimreen said, very much so. Is there a problem with that? No, Yael said, it's okay. No problem at all. We love all people. I think it is Shimon's stutter had grown heavier. He sounded like he was on the brink of tears. I felt a strange urge to climb up into the front seat and kiss both his eyelids, 165 kilometers per hour. The car had started shaking. I think it is a It's cool, my friend, you said, your voice steady. Everything is cool. 170 kilometers per hour. I promise you, everything is cool, you said, and even I felt calmer hearing your voice, Leif. I promise. Then there was a squeal of brakes and the car wobbled and skidded and eventually pulled to a stop on the side of the road. There was a heavy silence in the cabin. I thought for a moment that Shimon might pull out a weapon and execute us, all three of us, right there, and the headlines would read, Arab brother, Arab sister, Arab lover found dead in West Bank desert, sad, but not too sad. He didn't move though. It was as if he were frozen, a statue, one from which pain and confusion emanated like static from an old radio. He tried. We were quiet. He said. He was near tears. He tried one more time. Get out of my... Here, I said, but where? It's okay, Nimreen said in Hebrew. We wanted to get out here anyway. In fact, this was exactly where we'd hoped to go, really. Thanks so much. I'm sorry, Yael said. She sounded like she was on the verge of tears also. It's just... You tugged your large frame out of the right side of the car, humming to yourself. I climbed out after you quickly, just as Nimreen slammed the other door. I tried to close my door gently, but the Jeep sped off down the road, and I barely had a chance to shut it. We were left standing there in a patch of dust and scratchy bushes, our small backpacks in hand, stunned. Fuck you, Nimreen yelled in English after the car. I hope you fucking crash. I didn't. I didn't hope they'd crash. I hoped they'd turn around and say that they were sorry and take us to Haifa. And we'd have such a nice drive together that sweet, skinny Shimon would convince the others in his yeshiva that bigotry was not the way toward spiritual enlightenment. After all, they didn't turn around. The sun was starting to set.
All right. So, can you hear me? I switched. Okay, let's switch back. All right. You can hear me now. So, it was interesting to me that you picked that piece to read because I had folded the pages on the piece and reread that section multiple times. So, I guess I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about what this book is. Because for me, as I'm an American Jew who lived in Jerusalem, I actually went out there as a diplomat, very different entry point. But like Jonathan in the book, I very quickly had a group of very close friends around me who were all either Palestinian citizens of Israel or from the West Bank, and who really thrust me into a completely new reality. I mean, leading for me at the time to, real existential questions as an American, as a Jew, as a human being. And that, I read this and I sort of, because I know you, I'd love to know sort of the autobiographical, even if it's not the specifics, but the journey that you went on that's reflected in this a little bit.
So this book, it started out, I think, as what I have taken to calling a counterfactual autobiography, which is to say, so I'll give you a bit of my autobiography first, and then talk a little bit, get back to the book. So I was born in Jerusalem to American Jewish parents, lived there as a kid, moved back to Yellow Springs, Ohio when I was 8, thus the Ohioan accent to my English. I don't know if it's an Ohioan accent per se, but it's certainly not a strong Israeli accent. I was back in Israel as a senior in high school and was, fell in with a group of friends, and we were all excited about our upcoming draft dates and how fast you needed to run to get into which unit, and how cool which beret looked, and how hard this part of basic training would be, or how fun that part of advanced training would be. And I was excited about that too. I was a liberal. I was probably, somewhere on the left end of the Zionist spectrum. Even as a 17-year-old, I was curious and open-minded, and I thought that the occupation should end and that both sides should make steps toward peace, etc. But that felt immaterial to the question of joining the military. It felt that joining the military was an apolitical decision. Right? It wasn't even a decision. It was a fact of life, and whether you liked the prime minister or hated him, whether you were for the occupation or against it, you joined the military, and then afterwards you can go and play out the nuances of your political disagreements. But I had the sort of unique privilege of being an American citizen and having lived in the States for all of my teenage years. There's a specific period, 12 to 16, where if you're out of Israel for that entire period, you can request a delay to your draft date. So my parents encouraged me to do that. I delayed my draft notice, went back to the States for college, went to Middlebury, started learning Arabic just because I was curious, but still planned at the end of college I'd move back to Israel and join the military and take it from there. During my time in college, I started learning Arabic, and as circumstances unfolded, I went to live in a Palestinian village inside of Israel called Deir al-Assad. So it's a village in the north, not far actually from Akko. And I ended up living there for 2 summers as a college student, mostly to, I was ostensibly there to teach English, but really I was getting to know the people there, and I lived with a host family, and I made friends, and I sort of got to know the nuances, and suddenly this place that was completely foreign and completely frightening to me as an Israeli Jew was actually just another place in which I felt at home and at ease, and still a little off balance, and still a little out of place, but welcomed for the most part. And some people were charming, and some people were boring, and some people were obnoxious, and some people were brilliant, and these words you use to describe people in your life, rather than this sort of zoomed out Israeli Jewish discussion about all Palestinians, which I think sometimes boils down to this very almost dehumanizing, unsophisticated idea. There are good Arabs and bad Arabs, which is a nonsensical statement, because there aren't good people and bad people. There are people who are quirky and weird and irritating and love volleyball and whatever, fill in the blanks here, but that doesn't make its way into Israeli Jewish discourse because there's such strict separation and segregation. So I did move back to Israel at 22 after graduating, but at this point my politics had shifted, for me, not so far to the left, but for the Israeli discourse and for the Israeli spectrum way to the left. And so I began questioning whether I would indeed join the military. And by the time I got my draft date, I was 23. My draft was I was 23. I refused. I did it very publicly and theatrically. I spent 21 days in military jail eventually released on a sort of pro forma mental health ground. And afterwards I said, I should write a book about this. That's what one does. One goes through a sort of experience like this, and one writes a book about it. And I'm a writer, and I always write, and I communicate my experiences through poems and through blog posts and through op-eds and through essays. So I should, scrape all of that together into one pile and send it out into the world as a book. And I began that process, and I found an agent who was interested in working with me. And as I was probably 2 weeks away from putting the finishing touches on that book proposal, and then I sort of realized, I came to this sort of understanding that I was bored with that project. I told all those stories before. They were all out there for the public if they wanted to, if they could click on the internet, they could read various newspapers, they could look at my Twitter feed. And I wasn't interested in telling that story anymore. I wasn't interested in going back yet another time on the details of a story that I'd so deeply told, and I'd sort of extracted so many of the juices from it, that it felt like a husk, it felt like a lemon rind. And instead I was like, what would be a story that I would be interested to tell? And then quickly I was like, I'd be interested to tell the story of what didn't happen, but what almost did in my own life, right? So what didn't happen was that I stayed in Israel. I didn't stay in Israel when I was 17. I didn't join the military. But if I had, I'm sure I would have joined a combat unit, because I was a sort of a fit young 17-year-old, and in order to be seen as a full man as a 17-year-old, you join a combat unit. If you join a combat unit, almost definitely you'll be stationed in somewhere in the West Bank, possibly sent into Gaza. And so I wondered, what might that have been like? If a character who was similar to me in his ideals and in his ideologies and in his language skills, what if and who also had relationships and curiosity about Palestinians and their culture and their identity, and wasn't sort of coming from a place of belligerency or racism or condescension? To certain extent, I think all of those things, minus the belligerency, I think the racism and condescension exist even without intention of those being there. But certainly wasn't coming from a belligerent place, wasn't coming from an aggressive place, wasn't planning to join the army in order to crush the enemy or to kill the Arabs or to squash the Palestinian resistance, but rather was joining the army because that's what people wanted him to do, because that's what his grandfather wanted him to do, because that's what his friends were doing, because that's what he would do. It was very easy for me to imagine that perspective and to put myself in those shoes. And so that was the genesis of this book, starting off the idea that what if Jonathan, this character, who might have similar autobiographical journeys to me, but ultimately became very different, what if he did join the army and had these deep friendships and connections to Palestinian citizens of Israel? What might that be like?
Thank you. It's a very effective way of writing this, I have to say. For I think all of us who are engaged in this conflict read a lot of news reports, read a lot of analysis, histories. I can say for myself that this sort of an account, fictional or not, that is so much on the human side, is often a much more effective way at exposing some very tough lessons. Picking up on something you just said, the idea, not belligerent, sort of not intentional racism or dehumanization. One of the things that I picked up on, and I'd like you to talk about a little bit, throughout the book, are moments where ignorance shines through, and ignorance that is, I think, from the perspective of Jonathan, innocent, and from the perspective of the people he's talking to, with Palestinians, who it's their narrative, their history, the facts that circumscribe their lives. That ignorance is actually both racist and dehumanizing, and has a face of belligerence to it. Including, there's a moment when Jonathan, as a soldier, is asking what he can do to help a Palestinian in the middle of a clash, and then like, you can help by leaving. What do you mean? How can you help? There's a long passage which fictionalizes Kafir Qasim, which is, I talk to my American Jewish friends about this sometimes. There's a genuine disbelief in the fact that in one very famous moment in Israel's history, Israel massacred unarmed civilians. It's well documented, and you still get this wall of disbelief. And I had moments like this in my own life, engaging as I got to know Palestinians as people for the first time, and realized there were huge gaps in my own education, which again to me seemed regrettable and innocent, but in terms of how they impacted the world that my friends lived in, they were patient with me, but they certainly were not innocent gaps. Maybe talk about that a little bit. So it's a long entry point.
It's a great question, and I think so it touches on a number of points. I think one is that I've never really been interested in sort of like how do people who are really seeking to hurt other people, right? Or how do people who are sort of inclined toward violence or cruelty, how do they do that? That's never been the question that sort of held on to me or ripped my imagination. It's been much more powerful and compelling, I think real, to sort of ask how do people who are fundamentally decent and mostly well-intentioned and able to access a sort of decent degree of empathy and curiosity and open-heartedness, how do they get swept up into these situations in which they do really bad things and they are part of systems that do really awful and evil things? So I think that I actually don't really believe in the existence of evil people, but I definitely believe, especially having spent years very deep inside of the conflict and the machinations of the conflict in Israel Palestine, I believe in evil. But I believe that evil exists and evil can be done, even perhaps especially by people who are unaware or are well-intentioned or are mediocrely intentioned. And so this was an opportunity. I mean, I think that the fact of fictionalizing this book gave an opportunity for me to grapple with some of my own failures in empathy, my own failures in curiosity, without it being self-congratulatorily confessional. Right? I think that I had a fear that if this were a nonfiction book, I'd have to say, when I first heard about the massacre in Kufr Qasim, I didn't believe the person who was telling me because I thought, everything I know about the Israeli forces is they would never massacre 48 unarmed Palestinian civilians just because they violated a curfew they'd never heard about. Couldn't have happened. There must have been some other context. There must have been some sort of secret plot. There must have been some sort of violence done against the soldiers. So, rejecting that story from a place of defensiveness and a place of fear and a place of confusion, but still rejecting that story and that rejection being sort of an act of belligerency in some way, even if not intended as such. And I think if I'd written about that in a nonfiction book, there's something that could have come out very tidily about that. Like, once I was ignorant and now I'm wise. Once I made these terrible mistakes and now I would never make these mistakes again. But instead, embody this character without having sort of a clear wrapping up to the package, a clear conclusion to the story even, was a way to sort of sit in that and say, where does that still exist in me? Where does that still exist in many of us? Where does that defensiveness come from? How do I write that defensiveness with some sympathy, without drawing a caricature of the defensive Israeli Jew, without saying, the Israeli Jews they're defensive because they're mean and they're cruel-hearted and they never want to see Palestinians as humans, so they ignore their narrative and they squash their troops and they go on with their violent military occupation. And I think sometimes that caricature can come about. And I think what I hoped to do, and what I found I was able to do in some parts of the book at least, was to draw a portrait that is not necessarily sympathetic with all of the narrator's actions. It's not saying, he did this and I get it and I support him and I pat him on the back even when he was rude to his friends, even when he joins the army and goes out to the West Bank and sort of offers condescendingly to help a Palestinian man whose village is going to be destroyed as he's holding an M16 as part of the army sent to destroy his village. Not to sympathize in a way that is overly identifying and overly gentle, but to have compassion for it. And I think even in the chapter I just read, I felt as I wrote it, and I feel a lot of compassion for Shimon, for the driver of the car. I disagree with his actions, and that was actually sort of based on an experience where my brother and I were hitchhiking through a similar swath of the West Bank and were kicked out of the hitchhike because we were unwilling to say that, in this specific case, we're unwilling to say that there's an Israeli officer named Shalom Eisner who sort of smashed his rifle into the face of a Danish protester in the West Bank, and we were unwilling to say that that was acceptable, and so the guy sort of slammed the brakes on and stopped the car and told us to get out in the middle of the desert. But I think offering sort of a place, I hope that readers don't find any caricatures in this book, even as there's a wide spectrum of decency and cruelty and sort of easily identifiable with or more difficultly identifiable with characters in the book.
So I will say I didn't find any caricatures. I found it was quite effective at capturing the humanity of everybody across the spectrum and really forcing people to sort of sit with the awkwardness of these interactions. The interactions from Jonathan sort of trying to explain himself and talking a lot about the background of the Holocaust, which is a huge part of who he was, and I thought that, again, thinking myself into this, I'm always, as soon as someone starts raising the Holocaust and talking about Israel and Palestine, my shoulders go up, because I have lived my entire life with the frustration of using the Holocaust to justify injustices being done in my name, which doesn't mean that I don't think about the Holocaust. I come from the same background you do. This is part of who I am. I thought you wove in that element of Jonathan's background, his personality, his worldview quite deftly in a way that allowed him to remind his Palestinian friends who he was and let them remind him they were completely aware of it. And I circled this one comment, which I just loved in one of the early moments when he was meeting the friends of the twins. And so Irina is saying to her friend Kama in English, we at least need to give Jonathan a decent meal and some good pot before asking him to make up for the Nakba. And that just, there was something so real and so human about these interactions where everyone's sitting around this young man know exactly who he is, and to some extent are very aware of everything he's wrestling with in his own head, and are a little bit toying with him on how much they're going to challenge it and how they're going to draw out what is an evolution that he will go through as a human being, and they all know it. I thought that was quite deftly done. I guess before we open this up, so we're going to open this up, if you, as having given birth to this, it's now going to go off and grow up and walk, you know, what do you hope that this brings to readers? And where do you hope that it takes them in their own thinking about this, this conflict and about conflict in general and humanity and all that?
So I love that framing. So actually, after writing this book, I read a scholarly article by Bashir and Amos Goldberg. It's a brilliant piece. I think it's accessible online about sort of the need to talk about the Holocaust and the Nakba at once. And they wrote it with this incredible grace, saying that history is present in all of our actions. History is present in our politics. History is present in our individual identities. History is present in our familial identities. History is present in sort of how we walk around and how we see the world. But oftentimes there's either sort of a feeling of like, there's a feeling of flattening where one says, Holocaust and Nakba, two exactly parallel, political catastrophes which happened around the same time. Let's talk about them as if they were sort of flattened one and the same. And that's, going to be offensive to both groups, right? The Jewish Israeli is going to say, 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, and nowhere close to that in terms of the numbers of Palestinians who lost their lives in the Nakba. How can you compare these two? There was a systematic element to the genocide, where here it was, at least some would argue, less systematic ethnic cleansing, or others would push back and say there was a systematic ethnic cleansing there as well. And Palestinians would say, how can you put these two on the same table? Because this is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was the Israeli-perpetrated Nakba, not the Palestinian-perpetrated Holocaust. So what do you mean talk about these in the same breath and at the same time? And I think if I tried, so I'm not as scholarly, graceful and nimble as Bashir and Amos Goldberg were in their article, and I think I might have felt sort of stumped and closed off and said, I think if this were a nonfiction book, say leave the Holocaust far away, leave it out of this, it's too much, it's too heavy, it gets used to justify too much, gets wielded as a club. But I think in allowing this to be fiction, it allowed me to sort of delve into the history without an element of zero-sum game, without an element of flattening, without an element of saying, Jonathan's grandfather's story, Jonathan's grandfather is from Salonika, or Thessaloniki, Greece, which is a city that was a majority Jewish city at the turn of the 20th century, and 95% of the Jewish community was killed in Auschwitz. So almost doesn't exist in sort of in political memory, almost doesn't exist in collective consciousness. There's sort of a handful of survivors who sort of continue the memory of Salonika. But if you go to Thessaloniki today, which Jonathan does in this book and I did for research, there's no indication that this was once sort of a thriving Jewish city where the ports were closed on Shabbat rather than on Sundays because the city was so deeply Jewish in its character in the 1920s or 30s. And then Nathan and Reen's grandmother, whose family managed to stay in Israel after the Nakba, but then whose first husband and friends and village members were massacred in the Kufr Khan. In this book, it's called Kufr Kanut, which loosely means in Arabic. This is sort of one of those word plays that I can go behind the scenes. Loosely means in Arabic, a village of despair or a despairing village. But it's based in large part off the story of Kufr Qasim, which in 1956 was the site of this massacre that we mentioned now. So there's an ability to tell these stories in one book and between two covers without flattening them and saying they're one and the same, but with looking at the ways in which these family narratives and family traumas do trickle down even 2-3 generations later, in which the pulses of that which happened in 1930 or 1950 or 1970 doesn't just stop pulsing as we cross into the next decade. History. What is the quote? Past isn't past. It isn't even over. Something like that. And so I think that if there's one sort of broader thematic or ideological idea I hope we can offer, it's the recognition of the way that history throbs in our daily lives, and also just the space for multiple truths to exist at once without there necessarily being a competition as to which truth trumps the other truth or cancels out the other truth, and to sort of see the world in a way in which all these truths exist at once, and don't necessarily mean that all political narratives are equal, don't necessarily mean that all sort of takeaways from history are equally true or equally justified, just that these truths do exist simultaneously and in parallel without necessarily one truth needing to gobble up the other one.
All right, so we have some time, and we have a microphone coming up. Yay! Right here.
My question is sort of a follow-up on Mark Friedman's. What have you actually heard from people? I haven't read the book yet, I'm looking forward to it. What reactions have you actually gotten from diverse populations, Israelis, Palestinians, about how you've presented this, and do you feel that it's encouraging some dialogue?
So the first thing about this book is that it only exists in English right now. I certainly hope that in the course of its sort of toddler and teenage and adult life, it will start to exist in other languages, especially including Hebrew and Arabic. But right now, so there is definitely a selected audience of folks who can read it or who want to break their teeth around getting through English, even if they speak English very well. And so for the most part, readers have been American Palestinians or American Israelis, or folks who have sort of lived connection to the physical diaspora that enables them to read sort of comfortably in English. So there's a self-selecting bias to the audiences, but it's been incredibly gratifying to get reactions from, whether from Palestinian Israeli friends or Palestinian citizens of Israel who said to me that sort of this conversation between Kamar and Leif and Nimreen and Jonathan and a few others in this cafe felt like she could have been sitting there too with a bunch of her friends, and she was like, I know these people, like I know Kamar, I know Leif. And that was a really nice thing for me to hear. And similarly, an Israeli soldier, former Israeli soldier, whose politics I don't agree, sort of wrote to me and said, like, you did good, like your portrayal of the feeling before the young soldiers jump out of the plane, parachuting was right on. You even got the detail of the yellow cords. How did you know about the yellow cords? It was like YouTube and like a sense of empathy. I mean, chords didn't come from a sense of empathy. The chords came from YouTube, but the fact that I was able to sort of reconstruct this imagined conversation in a way that felt believable to an Israeli soldier who'd been a paratrooper and who'd, been in situations that, some similar situations to what I described here, that was also very gratifying without necessarily him saying that now I agree with you with all your political conclusions and I'm going to refuse to serve in the military tomorrow. But rather the fact that this empathy was able to be there and this sort of I think on the factual level that folks were able to see that people, like, one need not know anything about Israel-Palestine, I think, to get something from this book. I hope that there are elements that will speak to folks, even if they don't have much of a background in the conflict, and even if they are just interested in the story that is this sort of complicated friendship and romance and love story and coming-of-age story. But if one does know the backgrounds here, I think it was very important to me that they would see, that they would feel that this was not sort of done haphazardly. It was not done in a way that was flippant toward the facts, toward the histories, toward the languages, toward the syntax, toward the scenery. And the response has been incredibly gratifying.
I would say, at a very granular level, nothing in this rings wrong. It's interesting. I read this with an eye looking for things I'm not going to like. I've been at Israel-Palestine for so long. And going through it, there aren't any events that feel manufactured in order to make a point. Where each point is made, whether it's an interaction with a soldier or warnings not to cross that fence, because everything is not only authentic, you can actually find in your mind a moment when something like this, exactly like this happened. And I think it gives, in a sense, gives space for someone who is skeptical, which I'm not. I mean, I agree with your politics pretty much completely, but for someone who might be more skeptical, they're not going to find barriers to accessing the messages here. It's quite extraordinary in that way.
I think that sort of touches on, so just a quick point on that. I think it touches on, there's this conversation that goes on sort of in the literary world and in the writing world about whether a writer can write about characters whose identities are fundamentally unlike their own, or maybe in this case, whose national group is oppressed by the writer's own national group. And I think where I come out on that question is that, yes, but. I think that one of the important premises of fiction is that there is this fundamental human capacity for empathy with stories that we think are sort of deeply like our own, unlike our own, and identities that we think are deeply unlike our own. And so I think there has to be sort of an openness to writing about people and identities who are not yourself, right? Who are not only American, Israeli, Ashkenazi Jews who have lived in the U.S. and Israel. Some of the characters here, but not all of them. But I think the but here is that it has to be done with care. It has to be done with sort of humility. It has to be done with deep research on the lived level, research on the read level, research on the watch level, because there's nothing worse than reading a book about a story you know well, that you thought was going well from the beginning, and then they say something that they were like, and because Kevin was fasting on Yom Kippur and it was so cold and it was January 1st. And then you said, wait a second, like if Yom Kippur is on January 1st, how can I trust anything else in this book? How can I trust any of the narrators if something I know so deeply is so completely sort of out of sync with the facts? So maybe they didn't take it carefully, and maybe they're not treating sort of my identity with care, not with caution, but with care. And so I think it was really important. And I was, I had a lot of readers read this before it came out, sort of that diverse perspective of political identities, sort of not, obviously no one from the sort of right or far right read this, because I don't have anyone in my trusted close circles who are right-wing or far right-wing, but folks who are centrists, folks who are certainly pretty far to the right of me, and folks who speak fluent Arabic, folks who speak fluent Hebrew, folks who have lived in the States, folks who have no connection to Israeli or Palestinian politics, and so it was important to get those little things. No one came back and said, cut that whole character because he's nonsensical. But people did say, like, oh, actually, your use of this phrase should be flipped over here, and you put the wrong word first. Or another friend, actually, we know of Nair, Variahu, who's the head of Breaking the Silence, is a dear friend of mine, and he was like, loving this chapter, but you have too many seats in your Ze'ev. So Ze'ev is an armored vehicle, a wolf, which would transport soldiers around parts of the West Bank. And he said, there are too many seats in there. You can't fit 6 people in a Ze'ev. You can only fit 4 because of all the equipment. And I was like, that is exactly what I need. Like, what a gift to have someone. So I took out 2 of the seats, and one of the characters didn't get to join that scene. So it's nice to remember also the way in which this book, has my name on the cover, but really is such a collaborative process, and there's so many people whose sort of wisdom and insights made its way into the story. All right.
Follow-up question to the previous question, and I hope it doesn't contradict your insight about people not grouping people by ethnicity, but
Do we contradict ourselves? Very well, we contradict ourselves. We are vast, we contain multitudes. Paraphrasing Walter.
I wonder, in the reactions you're getting, do you notice any patterns from your Palestinian friends and your Israeli Jewish friends? Or is it not that large a sample?
I think the truth is it's not large enough a sample to say conclusively. And the fact is, I have many more Israeli Jewish friends than Palestinian friends. And so the sample skews very heavily towards, and not only Israeli Jewish friends, but left-wing, politically active Israeli Jewish friends have been more of those folks have read this book than Palestinians, but it's still been it's been lovely and gratifying and astonishing each time when folks who I have no connection to sort of will read the book and write something sort of new about it or exciting about it or excited about it. Although, at a certain point I had to stop reading all the Goodreads reviews because I knew I would go nuts. And as a sort of fragile, egotistical writer, I knew that, I'd hover over the 1-star reviews where they said that this book was trash and the plot was nonsensical much longer than I'd sort of dance and bask in the 5-star reviews where someone says this book changed my life.
Did you learn anything from blogging? You don't read the
Exactly. Oh yeah. So
Don't
the answer there is that I've mostly divested from reading the Goodreads and Amazon reviews.
Go Hawks.
Moriel, thank you for your book. I'm anxious to read it. I'd like to ask you if, in your experience, living in this terrible conflict where 2 peoples have been struggling to find a way out of this, if you believe that the way out of it remains as we, I say we, those who are interested in helping resolve this conflict, is the division of the land and the division of these 2 societies. That we have learned rather abruptly in the last 3 years is a vastly more difficult project than we had assumed when we looked at those maps and said, well, look, why not? This could be done in an equitable way. Have 2 decent, independent, sovereign societies living side by side, doing great things together, but with the pride of independence and identity and sovereignty that they both say they want. Is there an understanding, or at least some of a common identity that wherein lies the ultimate outcome to this conflict? The narrative here, I think, among students of the issue is that, most students, is that a unified binational society would only perpetuate civil war. as both sides sought to continue to dominate and oppress each other. And therefore, the only reasonably just and realistic way out of it is to divide these two peoples into two states. Now, is that at the same time, over this last 3, 4, 5 year period, more and more people are saying, whether it's tactically or strategically, they're saying, let's stop talking about two states. Let's start talking about justice, humanity, democracy. Now, is that because those people say, talking about these things, both sides will be jarred into realizing they have to divide the land in order to preserve these values, or because they think that a one unitary binatural state would be compatible with the values of democracy and freedom? Or is this a primordial struggle between two peoples, one of whom will ultimately gain absolute majority power, and either continue to oppress or destroy the other, whether that side is the Jewish side or the other side?
So, in this book, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I remember that the concepts two-state and one-state never appear. No one ever talks about it, no one ever brings it up, because, 17, 18, 19-year-olds probably aren't going to. Maybe they will in some cases, but they don't in this book. And I don't think I have a very smart answer in terms of the sort of the policy solution, and I'm actually skeptical of a lot of folks who are very convinced at this juncture in history, right, 2018, coming up in 2019. I'm skeptical of folks who are very confident that, one sort of political solution is really definitely going to work. What I can say is that the ideology of this book and sort of the ideas in this book don't necessitate one or the other, but there are ways in which either could be disastrous. So that is to say, a little more specifically, Amos Oz, who's an Israeli author, often talks about the need for a two-state solution as metaphorically comparable to a divorce. And I find that to be a super problematic framing for a number of reasons. One, in a divorce, hopefully the divorce will be the end of a marriage in which both parties chose to be in that marriage rather than, one party kidnap the other one in a sense. But more than that, it's this idea that we can sort of forgive that weird element, but it's more that it's a sense, and I think this is often the common sense in the sort of Israeli liberal and maybe also American liberal perspective. One group here, the other group there, as if you could sort of just draw a line halfway through the map and say Palestinians on that side and Jews on this side and Jewish Israelis on this side. And that to me is a perpetuation and not an amelioration of the current situation, because we are intertwined. Our lives are intertwined, our languages are intertwined, right? The Palestinian word for stoplight is amzun, which comes from Hebrew. The Israeli word for something being great is achla, which comes from Arabic, and that could be a trite little musing about how the languages have these similarities and how they learn from each other. Or it could be this recognition of the fact that we cannot be separated. And the only way in which there would be successful separation would be some form of ethnic cleansing, and that has to be odious to those of us whose political and moral compasses tend towards justice and equality. Because the fact is, in this book, I think another part of this book is about a friendship and a connection between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel. Right? They're citizens of the same state in this book. There are very few, no main characters and very few characters who are Palestinians living in the West Bank or East Jerusalem, and no characters in East Jerusalem or Gaza. And so the idea of a two-state solution where we put them there and we put us here would mean that Jonathan, Laith, and Nimreen would be, that Laith and Nimreen would be carted onto buses and, shipped out to Ramallah, where they've never even visited, the characters in this book, they've never even visited Ramallah because that's not their home city and because their parents were nervous. And so if there is a two-state solution or a two-state, I think a solution at this point has become sort of an absurd term for it. If there is a two-state paradigm manifested, I think for me, it depends on whether this is a paradigm which is sort of intended as temporary with an eye toward some sort of confederation or unification or joint collaborative future, or if it's an eye toward ultimate separation. Because if it's either ultimate separation, then it should be a far right-wing position, right? Because you think we do a two-state framework for right now, and then eventually we ship out all those Israeli citizens who are of Palestinian descent too, and then we have sort of a clean national ethno-state on either side, and I don't think that that's just or a recipe for sort of lasting betterness. And so for me, I don't feel strongly aligned with two-state paradigm or one-state paradigm these days. I think my radar is more attuned to whether the proposal has an ultimate aim towards building something that is shared or building something that is segregated.
Kristen?
I have a question. So how did you choose which dilemmas, moral questions to face, to have your characters face in this book? Because you obviously would have to restrict the universe of challenging realities that they face. So clearly there's a lot of grappling with occupation and violence and narratives, but what about internal politics in Israel? Something that obviously you have great experience confronting with your recent airport detention in Ben Gurion. So how did you choose which problems to have your characters experience, and then which ones did you have to leave on the cutting room floor?
I think without sounding coy, I would sort of answer by saying that I didn't really choose. I think I chose how to set out into this book. I chose that it was going to be sort of a story of a young American Israeli who moves back to Israel, has a close friendship with Palestinians, and then serves in the military, and at some point ends up sent to military jail for reasons that I didn't even know exactly why he ended up there. It's new. Those are the only paradigms I knew setting out. And then quickly, sort of the characters of Lathan and Marine developed and sort of took on lives. And as soon as they had names, I feel very strongly. I think at one point in an early draft, someone suggested changing Lath's name because I think the suggestion was that maybe American readers wouldn't be able to tell the gender of Lath, or they don't know if that's not a familiar name to anyone. And I felt so sort of like awful about that suggestion that like my whole body was like, you know, crunching up, and I was like, you can't change Lath's name. That's like stripping him of his identity. He's Lath. You know, he can't be Ahmed, and he can't be Noor, and he can't be Mustafa. He's Lath. And they're like, okay. It was just a suggestion. Like, don't change the name. But I think as soon as I knew the characters' names, I was able to sort of, their identity started to unravel for me. And there were elements, there were backstories and other conversations and other interactions the characters had that didn't make it into the book just because they either weren't as compelling or were a little bit more meandering. But as soon as I knew that the book was about Jonathan and Lathan and Reem, I sort of let them take the lead. And I would sit down every morning to write without necessarily a strong idea that, okay, like now I'm writing chapter 3, and in chapter 3, we're going to have to grapple with the idea of Jonathan, Lathan, and Reem facing together a far right-wing Israeli, and what it feels like for Jonathan to be in the car with, you know, his two Palestinian friends, but also to be in the in-group with the Israeli. Like it was not as conscious as that. It was more sort of trusting that the sort of weird soup of my subconscious and my political experiences and my read experiences and my lived experiences would come out in the way it needed to come out onto the pages, and with editing, if I followed the lead of the characters and what was authentic to them. So actually one other quick story about that is that Kayla, who's my wife and an amazing reader, would sometimes read earlier drafts, and she would flag a part and say, actually, you know, this part where Jonathan was speaking, he sounded like Mori. He sounded like Moriel. He sounded like you. He didn't sound like him. And I was like, that's an incredible thing to hear, because there's a temptation as a writer, especially with dialogue. There's a temptation to stuff dialogue with your own ideology or with your own pedantic sort of desire to explain, you know, like, Lathan and Reem said hi. Hi, Jonathan said. Did you know that in 1949, and then it doesn't sound like the way, you know, it doesn't sound the way people talk. It doesn't sound like it doesn't feel authentic to the characters. It feels like the writer is trying to sort of cram it in. And instead, I think I like the sentence that Lara pointed out, that instead what Nimreen would say, Nimreen wouldn't say, in fact, in the Nakba, 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Did you know this, Jonathan? She would say, come on, guys, like, let's give Jonathan some food and some pot before we ask him to make up for the Nakba. And that's what Nimreen would say. And, and there was sometimes, and which is not to say that the characters don't ever talk about politics. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they're talking about it with each other very forcefully. Actually, I'll read one quick part from that. So this was a.
I'm reading one of the pages that I'm holding on top.
So this is a conversation on Skype between Nimreen and Jonathan. Where Jonathan tells Nimreen about this sort of ugly interaction he has with the guy in Salonika, Greece, who sort of says, you Israelis are worse than the Nazis. And Jonathan's telling Nimreen about this. And so they start arguing, and Jonathan sort of says, my grandfather didn't come for gold or cheap labor, Nimreen. He was cheap labor, actually. For my grandfather, Zionism wasn't about getting rich, it was about survival. Without Zionism, I probably wouldn't even be alive. Okay, but think about it for us, Nimreen said. What does it matter if it's gold or if it's fear? The result on our backs in the Nakba and Kufr Kanut, the same way, either way, Jonathan. We can't be together, Jonathan, she didn't say. It has to matter, Nimreen. How can you not have compassion for someone seeking refuge from genocide or someone trying to save their people from extermination? How can your love for me not conquer everything, Nimreen? I didn't say. It's hard to have compassion for someone who's trying to steal your... What else were we supposed to do? Just march passively into the... We weren't the ones killing... What about Hebron in 1929? People with axes and... We did fucked up things, but that's true for all people who resist colonization. Whole entire families, not Zionist militias, little kids, their heads smashed open, and I bet you didn't know that the ANC exploded cafes in Johannesburg. We were trying to save I actually can't believe that your people, why are you blaming us for things like I was actually trying to tell you about? It's actually insane. You're the one who started on the nationalist past. I was. Nimreen froze again. I looked around, the blinds were letting streaks of late afternoon sunlight into the dim hospital room. It smelled like feet and tuna fish. I was alone with 9 other empty bunk beds. So that for me was, that dialogue actually took a lot of editing. Because it started off, they had this they start off with this sort of reasoned political argument where Jonathan's trying to make the case for why Zionism should be seen as different from colonialism because of the desperation of Jews in Europe, and Nimreen saying, it doesn't matter to me what reasons you came over here for, the results on our back was the same, and it starts off in these sort of full sentences, and then by the end of the dialogue, none of the sentences are full sentences, they're just cutting each other off, and they're saying, we were trying to save I actually can't believe that you're, and that for me, so that allowed it to sound more authentic rather than me sort of inserting this back and forth that I had with myself. And there was a point, it took me a while to get to that edit because I wanted to leave it in, because I thought it was a really interesting political back and forth, and I wanted to reach some kind of resolution, and I wanted to spell out all of the complexities, all of the contradictions, and then I realized if I was following the characters and not myself, at some point they just start cutting each other off and yelling at each other, and then this guy called it in.
On that piece, one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book, which I thought was very respectful to the reader, is that you don't spell all those pieces out. You have the respect for the reader that if they don't get it, hopefully they'll look it up and learn something, or maybe they'll read it now and in a year read the article and make sense. That Skype call sounds like arguments most of us have had at some point in our lives, and you don't need the full sentence because everything is encapsulated. They're essentially, we're all arguing in capsule arguments, where we already know the answers, and someone already knows the response. You can almost do the Seinfeld yada yada yada, and not to trivialize it, but it does feel that way. And I thought that captured it very well. I also thought, throughout the book there are pieces. On the Kufr Qasim piece, it was striking to me because I know the history of Kufr Qasim, but I only just read the article in Haaretz about a general who just died. The general who gave the order just died in his 90s. And I did not know that the order actually had been Yarhamu. I learned that from Haaretz, and then I saw it in the book. And in the book you don't explain it. It seems like an aside, but it actually is what the order was. And reading it, I had that sort of double punch, like a double tap. And I have enormous respect for an author who it's not an overly sort of didactic lecturing way, it lets you pull these out for yourself. And that's really throughout the book. The things that it grapples with, I was struck, there is a small passage, I'm not sure to tell you what it is in the book, on the accent. and this question of how Israeli soldiers identify with one word what someone is, whether they're Jewish or Arab, and it made me think of, in terms of nothing is unique in the world. When I lived in Lebanon, and Lebanese told me about how at checkpoints during the Civil War, the way soldiers would identify whether you were Lebanese or Palestinian was say the word, hold up a tomato. You know, they could tell from your accents immediately. And you didn't know who was manning that checkpoint, whether or not they were going to be killed for the way you said tomato. It's very like simple, there's no explanation, it doesn't need any further explanation. That snippet gives you insight into both the sort of mundane realities of life and the raw dehumanization involved. It's quite extraordinary. We have a little bit of time. I have one last question for myself. I want to end sort of around 11:15. It's 11:12. So if anyone else wants to jump in, my one last question is sort of a yes or no question, but also kind of a challenge to you. And I can't imagine I'm the first person who said this. Are you considering turning this into something that can be performed? Because this does read. I thought this when I was reading it, but now hearing you read from it, I think it even more. This lends itself to being performed very clearly. I don't know, I imagine it's much more work than I as a non-writer would think to turn this into that. But have you considered it, are you doing it, and will you do it? Because I think it would be fantastic.
So a few points on that earlier point, and then toward the yes or no question. So I think one is I'm really gratified to hear you say that you felt respectful to the reader. I think that a lot of times, especially when reading books that are sort of taking places in contexts that are not in the US, there'll be this sort of like long paragraph explaining a history. And even if I don't know the history, sometimes I feel a little offended by that. I feel, we're living in the era of Google and Wikipedia, where if I really need to know sort of the details of the massacre, it's on me to read that. I didn't read, I don't need to sort of give someone sort of an academic paragraph stuck in the middle of a novel. There's one sort of funny example of this where my editor, who mostly did an amazing job at the publishing house, but she suggested at one point, she was like, maybe early on in the book, you should tell readers what Bedouin are. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe they won't know, maybe this. And I had this it was really sitting with me for like a full week, and I really didn't want to, but I felt like, but what if the readers don't know? And then finally I had this act where I wrote 3 paragraphs justifying my decision not to explain what Bedouin are. She was like, okay, cool, you could have just said nothing. But it was important for me to sort of give this whole spiel about why I think that why I'd rather the reader, I'd rather err on the side of the reader not getting a term and being a little confused than on the side of the reader feeling talked down to and condescended to. And so in the question of this being, actually one more point on the other points. I think the point about the accents, that was one of those sort of gambles I took, because at this point, one of Jonathan's commanders explains to him this trick, that if you want to know the difference at the checkpoint, just have someone say a sentence with the R sound at it, because the Israeli Jews for the most part will say ra, and the Palestinians for the most part say ra, and the rolled R, and I was like, but would a commander actually say that? I don't know for sure. I've never heard anyone actually telling them about their commander saying it, but otherwise, how do the soldiers all know to do this? And so I put it out there, and I was like, is someone going to lash back at me? The commander would never say that. And no one has, so I'm guessing that it probably is said, and perhaps even often. And finally, about the question of this being acted out or enacted, I'm in pretty advanced conversations with a production company who are interested in seeing the potential of turning this into something on screen, probably more in the direction of a limited series than a movie, which is really exciting and
I would love to see
an
this on
unknown.
stage.
I would love to
It seems
see
like
it.
it's meant to be on stage.
Yeah, so at this point, one of the fun and surprising things about this is just the sort of collaborations that it leads to. And so if anyone knows folks who are doing theater and want to,
We'll have a
work on
conversation.
that, fantastic. But yeah, I would love beyond love to see this on theater. I think actually in a lot of ways theater was my first fictional love. When I was in middle school and high school, sort of acting was a huge part of my identity. Was what I imagined might be my dream career one day. I sort of faded out from it in college and went the direction of political science and Arabic language studies, and then got involved in activism and found my way back to fiction writing. And so it's been nice to get to sort of tap into some of my own theatricality in readings, but the idea of this becoming a play is sort of like feels like a dream.
So on a dream, that's a happy note. We're gonna end there. I want to thank you, Moriel. This was just wonderful. We need to fill our souls with empathy and burn, and if we can do it at the same time, it's even better. So thank you very much for coming. I think it was a privilege that we all got to be here today. I would encourage you to pick up the book. It is quite extraordinary. And on behalf of the Foundation for Movies Peace, and thank you from MEI, we